have to approach Foucault as an intellectual. Okay? Intellectual. See, the term public intellectual is very common in our midst. If you go to any particular place, even if it is whether it is Kerala or Tamil Nadu or Delhi or depending on the places we live, we encounter a lot of public intellectuals. Whenever there is an issue, whenever there is a problem, whenever there is a political crisis, these public intellectuals will start commenting on them through different media, probably through television, through Facebook, posts, and as magazine articles. Because in Kerala, particularly, we have so many magazines catering to the intellectual needs of everyone here. Okay. So these intellectuals, also are categorized. What I am talking about, intellectual. So Foucault is to be treated first of all as an intellectual. Okay. And what do intellectuals engage in usually? That we have to understand. Okay. When you consider Foucault as an intellectual, what is the role of an intellectual? Why should we keep these intellectuals alive? Why should we engage them? Okay. Why should we keep reading their articles? The moment we talk about intellectual, what comes to our mind is the subject called humanities. Okay. Because intellectuals come out with opinions, analysis, okay, and sometimes reasoned arguments. Intellectuals come out with analysis, opinions, and reasoned arguments. Whenever there is something going on, some problems going on, probably it is a murder or an assault or even a political crisis, a change of government or anything for that matter, okay, or any other pertinent issues which is running in the society, the intellectual will come and start giving opinions. Okay. So these intellectual activities sometimes is aimed at a broader audience and sometimes aimed at larger issues. Okay, issues pertaining to the very existence of human being as a whole, or the very meaning of being human, or such things also may be. Such intellectuals probably are not found in local regions. Okay. Foucault is to be considered as a person who has addressed certain fundamental issues in human sciences. Okay. The expression human sciences is typically Foucauldian. Instead of saying humanities or social sciences, he prefers to use the term human sciences. Okay. So in human sciences, it includes sociology, philosophy, all this psychology, literature, literary theory, language studies, all those things. May be categorized under what we call human sciences. So Foucault has come out with some original observations about human sciences as a whole. Okay. Human sciences, and the key words that whenever we listen to Foucault on passing, in the academy, probably it is about discourse. It may be about power. It may be about knowledge, okay. Or it may be about subjectivity also, okay. Right? So sometimes, very, very commonly people use panopticonic surveillance and all that. Okay, that's a very common term. Wherever we go in seminars, people, whenever theoretical assessments are made, I often heard the term panopticonic surveillance, and I myself use it, of course, as a teacher, because these terms are of good use in the classrooms. Students may not know. Normally, what actually happens is, whenever these professors use these terms like panopticonic surveillance or discourse, knowledge, power, subjectivity and all that, they often do not explain. Okay. It is understood, it is believed that everybody in the audience, is aware of these kind of terms. It's a taken for granted kind of thing. So all these taken for granted things sometimes creates a kind of inhibition in the mind of young students coming from, particularly from rural areas. Okay. So what exactly happened is, when I joined university for first MA, the class I attended first was one by Dr. R. Viswanathan, my own guide and professor. First MA, I'm from a rural background and I studied in a private college. I have not heard of anything very high sounding words and all that. He was talking about postmodernism. Okay. That was a shock treatment for me. Okay. And he has used a number of terms, very passively, as if everybody is aware of all these terms. Okay. He has spoken about Derrida, he has used terms like deconstruction, structure, Lang, parole, and so many things. As if, I was just wondering, I'm the only person who is not aware of all these terms, and all the others sitting in the classroom are not aware of. But this has created a kind of, shall we say, urgency in my mind as a young student. An urgency that, if I do not know these terms, my subsistence here or my survival here will be very difficult, so I must know something about it. Okay. That kind of an urgency might also be felt by each one of you. Okay. That is, in classes when you attend lectures by senior professors, they use all these terms, but they very rarely they explain what these terms are. Because it is believed that anyone who is coming to the academy will be aware of these basic terms. Okay. So I am happy that you have confessed that even some of these fundamental terms you are not familiar with. Okay. That confession needs so much of courage and so much of, shall we say, readiness. Okay, to present. In the academy normally I could also understand that people rarely show their ignorance. Okay. When somebody is talking about Foucault, we will nod as if we understand. Okay. Yes, of course. So if we say no, I don't understand what you mean. If you ask a question there, these kind of people are also coming to the academy. That the other person may be feeling. So even the speaker sometimes is using these terms without understanding their actual meaning. That also is the case. Sometimes when a person is talking about panopticonic surveillance and all that, can you explain this term? If you ask such questions, you'll be in deep trouble sometimes. So the first challenge for us is we have to clear this kind of simple roadblocks. Okay. Some of you may be finding it redundant because you might have already understood, but those people have to bear with me because those things. And continuing on considering Foucault as an intellectual, who is an intellectual actually? Who is an intellectual? What is the role of an intellectual? One of the definitions of intellectual which I like most and which I often quote is by Edward Said. Said has written one book on intellectuals, representation of intellectuals. He has in one place written about intellectuals like this. An intellectual is an outsider, an amateur, and a disturber of the status quo. Okay. An intellectual is an outsider, and a disturber of the status quo. So I think this particular definition, fits Foucault very well. Okay. Of course, even Said, belongs to that category. An intellectual is an outsider, amateur, and a disturber of the status quo. 2 or 3 other statements also he has made. Another one statement he has made about intellectual is, an intellectual is an unshamed and unreconstructed secularist. Okay. Unshamed and unreconstructed secularist. Okay. You have to be an uncompromising secularist. Okay. To be an intellectual. Okay. One who speaks truth to power is another. In another place Foucault says, Edward Said says, one who speaks truth to power. Intellectual is one who speaks truth to power. And 1 or 2 more things I will tell you about this definition. An intellectual is a courageous and angry individual for whom no worldly power is too big to be criticized. Okay. An intellectual is a courageous and an angry individual. Okay. Angry individual. Please make a note of this particular word. For whom no worldly power is too big to be criticized and pointedly taken to task. And no power is too big to be criticized and he taken to task such kind of powers. The real or true intellectual is always an outsider living in a self-imposed exile. Real and true intellectual is a person who is in a self-imposed exile. Okay. And on the margins of the society, he or she speaks as well as for a public necessarily in public. An intellectual speaks for public and speaks in public. And is properly on the side of the dispossessed, the unrepresented, and the forgotten. Okay. The dispossessed, unrepresented, and the forgotten. So intellectual is on the side of the dispossessed people, forgotten people, and unrepresented people. An intellectual is an outsider living in a self-imposed exile on the margins of the society. He or she speaks in public, okay, for a public, okay, and a true intellectual is also courageous, angry individual for whom no worldly power is too big, okay, to be criticized. These things you can think of when you think of Foucault. What comes to mind is these kind of things. Foucault was very courageous, and almost all intellectuals for that matter. Okay. Almost all intellectuals for that matter are courageous. Okay. The term intellectual actually is a 20th century coinage. Okay. Before that, the term intellectual was not used so popularly in the way in which we understand it today. Okay. Actually 20th century term, but it is applied retrospectively to people who lived earlier also. Okay. So after 20th century, when we talk about intellectuals, they also use this term to retrospectively refer to people who lived earlier also. But the term as an intellectual, particularly a term like public intellectual, was not in currency earlier. Okay. So intellectual in 20th century means by and large public intellectual. Okay. To become considered as a public intellectual, what should an intellectual do? Okay. To become considered as a public intellectual, what should you do? Okay. So sometimes a public intellectual may also become an enemy of the public at a stage. Okay. So that point I will come to a little later. So to be considered as a public intellectual, one needs to be engaged with the vital reality of the society, the contemporary world. Okay. Certain vital core issues. Okay. He has to engage himself in questioning, interrogating certain vital issues. Okay. So vital issues mean some public affairs of the society in the public sphere. Now the term public sphere, okay, is another very common term. Okay. That is the location of an intellectual's activity is what we call public sphere. Okay. The sphere in which social issues are being played out, okay, or played out or engaged, okay, is what we call public sphere. Okay. So the realm of a public intellectual is public sphere. Okay. So the term was popularized by Habermas. Okay. Many others also have used it here. Used this term. A particular degree of involvement in public matters, a particular degree of involvement in issues pertaining to society is required to make a person eligible for being treated as an intellectual. Okay. So, and once you become a public intellectual, you will definitely be influencing socio-political and cultural changes. That is very clear. Now, how Foucault influenced others, we will come to that point a little later. Okay. So, the term intellectual has got two basic kind of uses. One is a Marxist use and another is a non-Marxist use. Okay. So, when you think of Foucault, you have to think of Foucault as a non-Marxist kind of thinker. Okay. Foucault is a non-Marxist thinker. For an example of Marxist thinker is Antonio Gramsci. Okay. Antonio Gramsci, who divided intellectuals into two: traditional individuals and organic individuals. I'm not going into details of that. Okay. Who is to be looked at as a non-Marxist intellectual? Okay. He has taken a non-Marxist position as an intellectual. And another issue that I forgot to mention here is sometimes when an intellectual is in the service of the establishment, okay, it is considered to be very negative. Okay. There is a possibility that an intellectual may be completely purchased or bought by the establishment, government, in order to make statement as if he is making statement as a public intellectual. So, two people who are very severely criticized for being pro-establishment are American critics Samuel Huntington and Francis Fukuyama. Okay. These two people, what is the famous work by Fukuyama, Francis Fukuyama? End of history. Okay. So these two people, for instance, how come individuals get a negative kind of, shall we say, outlook? Okay. I mean, in public's view, whenever an intellectual is using his intellectuality, in the service of the establishment. Okay. So to take Sayle's term, an intellectual is a disturber of the status quo. If he is enhancing the status quo, he cannot be considered as a public intellectual. Okay. Of course, he may be a public intellectual, but that will give kind of negative connotations. Okay. So Fukuyama, who wrote End of History, End of History actually is, incidentally, I would say that it is talking about failure of communism and disappearance of, shall we say, Soviet Union. According to him, resulted in the victory of liberal capitalist order. Okay, right? And the other person, Samuel Huntington, is famous for Clash of Civilizations. Okay. He predicted that people's cultural and religious identity will be the primary source of conflict, okay, main source of conflict in the post-Cold War period. Okay, of course, all of them, both these people have theorized the scenario in America, scenario in the world, particularly in the aftermath of the Cold War. Okay, that is destabilization of Marxism, destabilization of Russian. Okay. Right, that's that failure of, shall we say, a Soviet Union. Okay, these two things are the context in which they are talking about. Okay. So actually, Clash of Civilization is contradictory to basic Marxian notion that this capitalism will give way for communism to come into existence. Okay, they predicted the opposite. Okay, Marx predicted that communism will come into existence. Okay, in the place of capitalism. But Samuel Huntington, as a pro-capitalist intellectual, okay, has predicted that communism will be replaced by capitalism. It is already fighting capitalism, and that is the situation is what is being referred to as End of History by Francis Fukuyama. Okay. So an intellectual may either be pro-establishment or against establishment. According to Saylean norms, if an intellectual is pro-establishment, he cannot be considered as an intellectual at all. Okay. He should be an outsider, an amateur, and a disturber of the status quo. Okay. If you enhance the status quo to be continuing, if you, shall we say, fall in line with the common sense existing in your society, if you fall in line with the natural, what is called natural or naturalization. Okay, it is, when our day-to-day activities become regular, what will happen is it become our second nature or it become nature. Okay, so an intellectual will always question this kind of naturalizations. Okay, so if you are not questioning these naturalizations, if you are not questioning the status quo, if you are not questioning the establishment, if you are not a non-conformist, okay, according to Saylean terms, you cannot be considered as an intellectual. Okay. So what I wanted to come to conclusion about Foucault is that, according to these criteria, we can consider Foucault as an intellectual. He did not respect, okay, any establishment while giving his views. Of course, probably towards the end of his life, he might have made some changes, but by and large, he has made this. Now, before I go into the method used by an intellectual, okay, I would like to tell certain things here. One is, there are two ways in which we can approach Foucault. One is considering Foucault as a philosopher, okay, right? That is, to study Foucault as a philosopher, you have to use tools of philosophy, okay, right? For example, we can have an ontological or epistemological analysis of Foucault's works. Another method of understanding Foucault is from the perspective of humanities, okay, humanities and of course social sciences, okay, right? where we can approach not the core philosophical problems encountered by Foucault, but certain issues pertaining to what he calls the human sciences. Okay. Now, what I would be attempting here is not a philosophical study of Foucault, because that will be very highly technical and it may not be understandable easily for a beginner. Okay. For us, it is better we understand about Foucault as a humanities scholar or a social science scholar.